Bill had sobered up in December of 34, and between December 34 and roughly April of 35, he had gone around New York trying to be helpful with the Oxford Group crowd, and sober up drunks, I guess, going in and out of bars to catch a few of them, and none of which worked. And then at that juncture, he got a job offer, which was kind of wonderful because he hadn't had many job offers. But the word got around that he was sober, and he always was well liked. He never had trouble finding people who liked him, and some of the people who had known in the old Wall Street days still did like him. So somebody gave him a job of going out to Akron to try to assemble a proxy fight for a machinery company, the name of which I don't quite remember. Doesn't much matter, because it was a failure. And the crowd that had sponsored him picked up their marbles and went back to New York and left Bill with, I think, very little money, maybe $5 or $10 or something like that. So there he was in Akron at the Mayflower Hotel, which was a nice hotel then. The story goes, marching up and down the lobby of the hotel with a bar. Prohibition has ended. We're back into selling drinks openly, several years already, and joy and music and laughter at one end, and Bill, by the time he gets back to the other end, it's all gloom. Bill is feeling very low, very discouraged.
But Bill's walking back and forth, and on the one end is the bar, and on the other end is the telephone booth, and halfway in between is the listing of churches and their services and their ministers. And as Bill is walking back and forth, pacing, he was a great pacer, he hears from the bar the sound of the ice clinking in the glasses. If anyone ever doubts whether Bill Wilson was an alcoholic or not, the way he describes the sound of the ice cubes crackling those glasses, you know he's got it. And he really gets scared. He says, I'm going to get drunk.
Bill is feeling very low, very discouraged, and has the insight to see that, for heaven's sakes, I need to talk to another drunk. In other words, he began to see this thing he had been doing, whatever else it had been doing for him, had been keeping him sober. So he decided to look for one. And he called some names on the telephone church list, I think it was. And I don't remember the exact figures, and there's much debate about this among people who are into the minutiae of AA history, whether he called 10 names, whether he called them in the lobby, or whether, not having any money, he went up and called them from the room phone. You see the kind of thing you can get into. But Bill was famous in telling his stories for making them sound good and not fussing too much with precise detail. And so the version of the story that comes down to us is that while standing in the lobby, he finally reached Reverend Tunks, who was actually an Oxford Group participant, a clergyman, an Episcopal clergyman. And Tunks suggested a gentleman whose name I can't bring back right now. And that gentleman, when called, suggested a woman named Henrietta Seiberling.
She told me about Dr. Bob, how he'd fallen apart in that town as a surgeon, how he'd tried the groups, how he'd read religious literature, how he tried church attendance, how he'd been treated medically. She knew he wanted to stop. Why couldn't he stop?
The arrangement was made to meet the next day. Bob said he'd give this bird from New York 15 minutes. That's a classic line in the whole thing. And they got there, and Henrietta greeted them, and I believe she gave them dinner, whether before or after that. Bill and Bob sequestered themselves in one of the rooms of the place, the library, I think, and they talked for over 5 hours. It was a historic, classic, wonderful meeting, and all we know is that apparently Bill told Bob what he knew about alcoholism and what his experience had been. It was this trading of, we now say in the formulaic line, of experience, strength, and hope with another alcoholic, which is the carrying of the message. And Bob was taken with it. I mean, obviously, a man who set out to spend 15 minutes spends 5 hours plus, and knew that he was talking to somebody who had the true lingo, you know, that was speaking the truth about the condition they both shared.
Bill, up until this point, had been telling people about alcohol, even after he changed after Dr. Silkworth, not telling them first about his spiritual experience, but telling them first about his disease, his malady, his story. Here, the first person he's going to tell it to is a doctor, a physician. How can he tell a doctor something about a disease? So what he does is start off by telling his own story. This is my story, and I know that in order to stay sober myself, I have to try to help you. And I can do that by telling you my story. And they stay locked in that adjoining study for from 4 to 5 hours.
You know, the next part of the story is that Bob stays sober some period, I forget what it is exactly, and then he has this urgent call. You know, those of us who are familiar with this situation know about urgent calls. And Bob's urgent call is to attend the AMA meeting in Atlantic City, which he has attended since time immemorial. So naturally, you got to attend it, right? So there's a discussion. Should he go? Should he not? Anne doesn't want him to go. She has a preternatural sense this is a bummer. But Bill says, well, you know, got to live. So anyway, off Dr. Bob goes. Well, the sequel is very obvious. He comes home drunk as heavens. And now the job was to get Bob ready for this operation, which was to occur a day or two hence.
And Dr. Bob woke up early in the morning. He was supposed to perform surgery that day. Now, it was very important that he perform this surgery because his reputation with the medical community was in shatters. And so Bill took him to the hospital and gave him a bottle of beer to kind of steady his nerves. And that was his last drink. And then he performed the surgery. But he had told Bill he was going to go through with whatever it took to get sober. And so then after the surgery, he went around, started talking to people he had been on the outs with, really working what we call the 9th step in AA. And he came home that evening very happy.
Bill wanted to figure out what worked and to go with what worked. He was really focused on people not drinking. I mean, he found out that it was working with other alcoholics really that saved his own life. And that became one of the cornerstones of alcohol. If we've got another dogma, it's that you know, when all else fails, work with another alcoholic. You know, there's a lot of talk about vital spiritual experience. You know, Bill had the great wind blow through him. I've heard people speak in AA meetings who have had white light experiences. But the fact of the matter is, that doesn't protect you for not having a drink for the rest of your life. And it didn't protect Bill from not having a drink for the rest of his life. I mean, Bill ended up in this hotel in Akron, walking back and forth between the bar and the phone booth, you know, and thinking, he was thirsty. The guy was thirsty. He wanted to have a drink. He was a failure again on another business trip he was on. He had no money. He could barely pay his hotel bill. And the question was he going to do what had worked for him in the past, try and find another drunk to talk to? Not necessarily to get the other drunk sober. What he wanted to do was to stay sober himself. That was the deal. So he's going back and forth between the bar door and the phone booth. I think that's a profoundly, when I think about that, that's a profoundly moving thing for me. You know, I mean, a lot of people's life hung in the balance with Bill Wilson walking back and forth between the bar and the phone booth. But most especially, my life hung in the balance. And Bill went and picked up the phone, made several phone calls. I've heard stories where he made 10 phone calls before he got somebody who would talk to him. And eventually that led him to Dr. Bob Smith.